I'm Steve Wake, as you can tell here from the slide, of course, and that you're looking at the guide probably, but this is a Power BI Premium talk that I've been putting together and doing it a lot at SQL Saturdays and stuff, but a lot of people get a lot of use out of it because there's probably quite a bit of misinformation out there about Power BI Premium, so this one will break down all the stuff on it, but let's get through some of the intro stuff that I'm sure you've seen many times over the course of the last 2 days, but as always, silence your cell phones. As I mentioned, I'm Steve Wake. I work for Brown & Caldwell, which is a environmental engineering firm that just helps with municipalities and states and cities to build water treatment plants, water reservoirs, water pipelines, stuff like that. So I work in the IT group within Brown & Caldwell, and we have been actually using Power BI Premium for probably about 8 months now at this point, so pretty much since the beginning of this year. So I've been building up a lot of experience with it and found that it serves our needs really well and can pass on what I know about it to help anybody else that might be looking to make that decision as well. But before Power BI, I've been doing pretty much everything Microsoft BI for over 20 years now at this point. Started out with SSRS back when it first started, and then from there was able to learn how to do SSIS and SSAS, and then have leveraged that knowledge then to actually do more of the background stuff in Power BI, but I do still build reports occasionally with Power BI as well, but I am kind of more focused on the architecture back-end side, so I can answer a lot of questions with that too, as far as making sure you're using the right setup for your data sets and your data models and stuff like that as well. The other thing I actually do on the side as well outside of work is I do run a Power BI user group in the Denver area, so if you are in the Denver area or somewhere nearby, make sure to look us up. It's just milehighpowerbi.com is the website for the group. We meet actually on the second Thursdays of every month in Denver, so very welcome to see everybody come out and share more knowledge on Power BI as well. All right, so our agenda for this session, just going to go through a little intro on Power BI itself, and then all the different products that are part of Power BI, because I think that's where a lot of people are surprised. It is actually a suite of tools. It's not just Power BI that you may think of as the website, or Power BI Desktop as the software that you use to build the reports, but there are other products too, so we'll go through and break all those down. Then I'll get into specifically on Power BI Premium what the features of Power BI Premium are to make it so that you understand what's included in that extra cost, which we'll get into the costs as well. And then there's what you can do as far as admin capabilities within Power BI Premium. So once you've spun up a Power BI Premium instance and capacity, what all you can do within the web UIs to actually manage that instance and make it so that you can secure it for your users. And then I do have a little bit of a talk on some of the future features coming to Power BI. That's probably the one section of this thing that's changed the most because they keep making new announcements, of course, all the time. So some new stuff actually I've just learned within this week has been added into that, and I hope that we'll have time at the end for some Q&A. All right, so out of curiosity, how many people, I assume you're all using Power BI. Is everybody, raise your hands if you're currently using Power BI or you're just evaluating it? Okay, so pretty much everybody. And then how many are already on Premium or evaluating Premium? Okay, that's about normal. Is usually about a quarter of the people are on Premium, and that's kind of why I like doing this, because there is kind of the, you got to figure out if it's right for your company, and it does cost a lot of money. So that's kind of what this session will help you decide. I could probably skip most of this as far as, since everybody, it looked like, raised their hand on what Power BI is. So most of you know that what it is, as far as I mentioned before, that it's a suite of tools. So that's something to keep in mind. It's not just the website, as I mentioned before. It is multiple different pieces of tools that have come together over the last, I guess, almost 4 years now that they've had the product out. And it keeps growing as to what they're including within Power BI. So I also have a link here. So all the slides are already uploaded up to the past website. So feel free to grab those there. And then there's some hyperlinks in here, like this one to the roadmap and the vision for Power BI. So check that out if you're interested on what Microsoft is saying publicly as far as what they think the future of the product is. All right, so now we'll get into some of those products. So as you can see, this is kind of the list of products as of today that are considered part of Power BI. The one most people are familiar with that you're probably all using, Power BI Desktop, which is the free Windows app that you can actually go out and download to actually build the reports. That's a Windows-only app, so you do have to install it onto a Windows computer for it to actually work, which is kind of one of the limiting things about it if you're, on Linux or on Mac, as far as that kind of stuff, is there's no way currently, at least, to do a lot of that, the capabilities built into desktop on anything other than Windows today. So keep your eyes open for some of the stuff. If you might have seen the announcements on that Synapse product, it looks like they're trying to move some of that stuff into the web, so there might be some changes to that coming in the future, possibly not requiring an actual desktop app, which would be kind of cool. Then the other piece that's there is Power BI Mobile. So everything in Power BI that you build, all the reports, dashboards, everything you deploy is all out of the box mobile ready, which is great. You don't have to worry about bringing it into an extra tool to actually make the report work on a phone or on a tablet or any of those other form factors. It's just out of the box will work on those different form factors, which is great. So you get these mobile apps, which they have for in the Windows 10 store. You can actually get the mobile app. So if you have a Surface that's like a, where you can undock it and have the tablet and stuff like that, you can use it in that kind of experience. Or you have the iOS or Android apps as well. So those are all supported by Microsoft and have all the full functionality built right into them. Then the other piece that's out there is the service. So this is where if you're actually wanting to share your reports with your whole company or find a way to put them out there to make it easier for people to get to, you actually publish the reports from desktop up to the service itself. You can do that with even the free license. Just be aware that it's going to a shared server, so everybody that has a free account is basically in the same space. So that's kind of one of the biggest differentiators between the free and premium that we'll get into. But just know that that is something you can do with free. It's just going to go to your own personal area on the Power BI service. If you try to share, that's where you start getting into needing the pro licensing or the premium licensing that we'll get into. But if you want to just for yourself put it out there to try it out, that's all free that you can do as well. As long as you don't have I think the restrictions are, they look for, you can't have a gmail.com email address or what's the other one, outlook.com if you're using Microsoft services. They do want it to be like your own private domain that you own, or a company's domain is usually what you have to have as far as an email address to sign up for that free account. One of the newer ones that they've launched that's mainly only for people that have the premium capacity set up is the paginated report builder. So they came out with the capability in premium that we'll get into where you can actually take the existing SSRS reports or the RDL files, if you're familiar with kind of how it works in the back end, and actually publish those up to your Power BI premium workspaces. So gives you a lot more freedom as far as being able to deliver some more of those operational type reports that aren't as interactive as the Power BI reports are. So if you do have premium, that is something you get right away with your license and premium, is the ability to publish those SSRS type reports up to the Power BI service. So to do that, you need this report builder app, which is just it's basically a customized version of, if you're familiar with the SSRS report builder that's been out there for quite a few years now, was supposed to be the end user ability to build SSRS reports that they put out a long while ago. They just modified that to actually make it so that it published to the Power BI service. So that is out there to check out if you're interested in that. And then if you are actually accessing on-premises data, so if you've got a lot of stuff that's still in your own data centers, on your own servers, that you're running that you need to get to that data, you're going to need to use the Power BI gateway if you're going to publish those reports up to the web. It's basically just a small Windows app that you install on a server, typically is what they say you should do it with, but you can actually test it on your laptop if you want to. There's what they call a personal or enterprise mode for that gateway that you can run it in, and that just makes it so that then you can have a, I don't want to say punching a hole, but it allows the capability of getting through your domain network or your data center and getting out to the internet so that the data securely can pass through. So it's all encrypted and stuff like that, but it's just basically a way that you can authenticate and say that any of the data that is being requested from Power BI that's on your on-premises servers goes through that gateway and it has access to those servers within your own data center to actually use that data in your reports. So that's what the gateway is there for. And like I said, it's free to download and use as well. If you are going to start developing reports that use the gateway with those data sources, that's where you'll also need a pro license. So that's the other place where Power BI Pro licensing comes into play, which we'll get into in a second. The next level, so there is, Premium has kind of two different areas that it actually lives in. So there's the when you typically hear people talk about Power BI Premium, it's what they call the P1 through P3 SKUs, is what they call it, which are just their Microsoft's unique product naming of those. So they're different levels of capacities from the P1 to the P3. If you're familiar with how they do stuff in Azure, the P1 is the first level, which is a 25 gigabytes of RAM and a 8 processor box, basically, is what you get for Premium with a P1. And then from there it doubles. So a P2 is double that, a P3 is double the P2, et cetera. So you allocate those based on how much usage you think you're going to use in Power BI Premium. And then from there they also split it off and do what they call Power BI Embedded, which is a whole separate set of these same kind of product SKUs, but with different pricing. So with the P1 through P3 I mentioned, pretty much requires you to have a yearly contract with Microsoft to actually say you're going to commit to a full year. You can do stuff, I think, as month to month if you want to, but you're going to get the best pricing from Microsoft if you sign a contract saying you're going to pay whatever dollars per month for a whole year based on what level of the P SKUs you get. Whereas when you get into the EM1 through EM3 SKUs that they have, which are much smaller machines than the P1 through P3s, those are actually on a month-to-month basis, so you can actually get those a little bit cheaper. As you can see there in the slide, it kind of shows that it's about $600 a month for the EM1 level, and it just doubles from there for each of those. So that's kind of where that level is. And then you can do what's called the Azure hourly SKUs, which you can actually just pay by the hour, which is kind of an interesting setup, especially if you just want to test it and you just want to play around with Power BI. You can actually spin up those A1 through A6 SKUs and just pay by the hour. So if you aren't sure you're going to use or want to use a whole P1 at $5,000 a month, you could actually play with the P1 or A1 through A6 SKU and just see how it works for you, publish some reports to it, and then you can actually pause it within the Azure portal, which we'll get into, and actually not be charged for it. So you can pause it, it'll still remember all your stuff, and then you can bring it back up the next day or whatever. So it gives you a little bit more freedom to actually do stuff. And this whole thing, as you might have noticed if you're familiar with the UI, is actually in Power BI. I'm actually doing this presentation on my Power BI Premium SKU, where I actually did build it as an A4 SKU to run, these demos and stuff to just kind of show, anybody can purchase these SKUs. You don't have to be a company. You can be kind of an individual as well. But just know that those options are out there, which is great. And I have mentioned Power BI Pro, which is the next one on there. That is kind of the next tier that most people think of when you go from the free, you go to Pro, and it's kind of the dividing line that I think is the easiest to explain it is anytime you're going to share anything or you're going to access anything on-prem from a data perspective, you're going to share the reports or you're going to access on-prem data, those are the lines where Pro comes into play. So even if you have premium, you still do need Pro licenses. So I know a lot of people get confused with that one, that they think you buy the $5,000 a month and you're done. That's not true. You actually do still need Pro licenses for each of the developers who's actually going to be deploying reports to that premium capacity. You do still need to pay well, $10 is the retail price, but you can, if you buy enough in a package or whatever from Microsoft, you can typically get it cheaper. But yeah, the idea being $10 per user per month is what you would pay for the Pro license. That would give them the capability to be able to publish to the premium capacity, access to the gateway if they need it for any of the data, and then to be able to also share the reports out with people within your company as well. So kind of a little misnomer that's out there that I hear a lot is that people think, oh, I'll just buy the $5,000 a month and I'm done. That's not true, because you're still going to have to buy however many Pro licenses you'll need for your developers within your company as well. But it is limited to just those that are going to develop the reports. So once you have the premium capacity, you can actually, it still opens it up. The pros publish it to the service, but then anybody else in the company then can actually access those reports without requiring a pro license. So that is the one place where you save some money on that setup. The other thing I will mention with the pro licenses, if you are on Office 365 or Microsoft 365, actually I'm not even sure if it's really in Microsoft 365, probably shouldn't mention that, but Office 365, if you're on what they call the E5 level of it, it actually includes Power BI Pro licenses for all your users that you license on that level of Office 365. So that's kind of another way to get around maybe getting cheaper Power BI Pro licensing, because I think the difference from P3 to E3 to E5 in Office 365 is like $15 a month or something per user retail price. So you're getting a lot more than just Power BI Pro. There's a whole bunch of stuff with Teams and stuff like that you get in that level too. So check that out if your company is considering going that route. You might save a little bit of money on your Pro licensing by actually going up to the E5 level as well, which is something that our company actually just did with our negotiations with Microsoft in the last couple months. So it is an option that you can use to save some money. And then the last thing I'll mention product-wise, at least on this for this part, is there's the Power BI report server. So if you are still an on-prem shop and you kind of want to kick the tires on Power BI and still run it on your on-prem servers, this is a great way to do it. So if you already have, if you're already set up for SQL Server 2016 or higher licensing with an active enterprise agreement or software assurance with Microsoft, you can actually download the Power BI report server, which is really just a superset of SSRS. So it includes all the capabilities that exist today of SSRS and just adds on some more of the Power BI capabilities, like just the ability to publish PBIX files to your own server on your own data center. And then that still will require you to buy Pro licenses, because you will still need the Power BI Pro licenses for people to publish to that Power BI report server on-prem. So even though you're on-prem, they're still going to get you with the Pro licensing. Yep. Yeah, so it's still SSRS at the base, so it has all the functionality of SSRS, and it just adds Power BI the ability to publish PBIX files to it. Yeah, well, so it uses, if you were just in Chris Finland's session before this, actually, they say not to use the Power BI report builder or paginated report builder to build reports for the on-prem Power BI report server. When you actually install the Power BI report server, the download actually gives you a specific version of Power BI desktop that's locked to that version of the Power BI report server. So yeah, it gets a little complicated because they update the Power BI service like every month online. The Power BI report server they update once a quarter. So they give you basically all the updates that have gone online for the last quarter, and then they make a version of the desktop that's locked to that version. You could use the Power BI desktop that's just out there, the latest version. The problem you might run into is if you're using something new in that report and you try to publish it to Power BI report server, it may not work because it doesn't have that functionality yet. I saw a couple more hands. Yep. Are there any, excuse me? Limitation on the features. So yes, there are limitations with Power BI report server on the features. You can't do dashboards as they exist in the Power BI service, where you can actually pin individual visuals from a report to a dashboard. You can't do that within Power BI report server. You also cannot do workspaces. You know, that concept doesn't exist. You're basically just publishing the report to the folders like you do today with SSRS reports. So you can't build the apps, you can't do any of that kind of stuff that you can do in the service. But other than that, it should be pretty much all the capabilities of Power BI other than that. And I don't think they're going to change that, because those are the kind of capabilities that would probably require them to rework the SSRS engine to make it work. So I don't see that changing anytime soon. Yep. You had a question?
You may tap into that later, but premium and embedded, in order for us to sort of test premium capacity features, what's the lowest level we can go?
Right. Okay. So he's asking about, yeah, what level does he need for the embedded SKUs to test the full features of premium? I don't think even with EM3 you can get all of the features of Power BI Premium. You get most of them. I don't know exactly what they've never put out a nice bullet chart that tells you, okay, for this capacity you get this and this. But what I do know for the A SKUs, for the hourly SKUs, you have to go to A4 or higher to get all of the capabilities of a P1. Basically, the chart that they show online that I've seen at least shows, you know, A1, 2, 3, and then it shows A4 with P1 right next to it. So those are basically considered, you know, completely equal. And then from there, the P2 is equivalent to an A5, and a P4 is equivalent to an A6.
Okay, and just to follow up on activating that in portal, if I go into Office portal, I can activate either embedded or premium capacity. And in Azure portal, I just have embedded. So what's the difference?
Right.
When to use what?
Right. So yeah, he's asking about how to actually spin up the different types of premium capacities and why they're in different places. That I can't answer as far as why they put them in different places. I'm just as confused as you. I just know that, like with the Azure SKU, the A SKUs, it's all within the Azure portal. So you'll see when I actually demo some of the admin features that a lot of them aren't there because I'm in the Azure version, so I have to go to Azure to actually configure that stuff. The E SKUs, the EM SKUs, I think, yeah, like you said, is all in the Office portal for your company to spin those up and down, and same for the P1 through P3. Those are all controlled through there, or through, once you're set up with your first premium instance, then you can easily add. If you're a capacity admin, you can go and add more right from the Power BI portal, but you can't do that for the EM SKUs or the A SKUs within the Power BI portal. So it's kind of, yeah, weird that some stuff lives over, and I think it has more to do with how they bill, because I think the EM SKUs and the P SKUs are considered to be billed by the Office 365 area, whereas the A1 through A6 are all considered Azure, so that's why they're all built through the Azure portal. So, yeah. Correct. Yeah, the A4 would be in the Azure portal. Yep. Okay, well, I'll take like one more. Let's see if we can get the.
So if we have an enterprise server license, we can install Power BI server.
Power BI report server. Yep.
Costing anything extra?
Yeah. So he was asking about if he has existing enterprise. So yeah, if you have existing SQL Server 2016 or higher enterprise, yeah, it has to be enterprise, not standard or any of the other licenses. And you have software assurance, which is, they call it SA, sometimes you'll hear them say that, then you can, yeah, you can download and install Power BI Report Server. Now it has to be it'll match. You can't put it on a server that's bigger than what your license is for. So it has to be a match for the CPUs and memory that you're licensed for on that SQL server. No. So yeah, he was asking about the publishing, and you won't get away from being required to do the Power BI Pro licensing for even on-prem. Yep, unfortunately. Do you still have something, or did that answer yours?
From your experience, what's the number of Power BI users that brings you to a break-even from switching
Right.
to premium?
Okay, yeah, he's asking about where's the break-even point for switching. If you do the math, just straight out, you would say 500 users basically if you were looking at it from a perspective of the $10 per user per month. If you've bought 501 developers, or if you're in a situation where, yeah, you haven't gone into that yet, you would require Pro for everybody that was even interacting with the reports if you don't have Premium. So then, yeah, if you've bought your 501st Pro license and you know that a portion of those, a small portion are your developers, then it probably is kind of cost effective to start thinking about whether you would go to Premium at that point, because then you don't have to buy the licenses for the non-developers anymore, the Pro licenses. Yep. And we just kind of made a decision. It was kind of a, pie in the sky number thing with us. We went ahead and actually went to Premium even before we rolled out any of the reporting. So there was only just the 5 of us on the BI team really that we already had Pro licenses for, and we bought those as individual Pro licenses at the time. And then we went ahead and spun up a Premium because we wanted to take advantage of some of the stuff I'll get into that are the Premium only features that we wanted to use. So that's the other deciding thing. If you don't necessarily want to look at users, there may be a specific feature that you want, like the publishing the paginated reports up into Premium, that you have to go to Premium for that no matter what. Whether you got 5 users or 200 doesn't matter at that point if you want that feature. All right, so we'll move on to getting into some of those features. Speaking of which, so yeah, here's kind of a list, and it is a constantly shifting and changing list of what you do get as far as premium features with Power BI Premium. The biggest one that I always point out is the dedicated capacity. So the biggest thing with it, and it hasn't become an issue yet that I've heard of with the free or shared capacity, you can have a noisy neighbor situation where there's nothing to stop someone from deploying a report into the free shared capacity that all of a sudden slows everybody down because you're all kind of running on the same infrastructure on the shared or free tier. So it could happen. I have not heard of cases where it has happened at this point yet. They try to throttle stuff and control that shared environment to prevent that from happening, but it could still happen. Whereas if you go to Premium, the idea is it's kind of your box. Your company has exclusive use of that box. So you have a little bit more control. You could still have the noisy neighbor problem yourself, but at least you know it's your stuff that's causing it, not somebody that's completely out of your company that's causing it. And there's also firewalls and stuff like that, so you don't have to worry about if you're on shared capacity, people getting access to your reports and stuff like that. That's, of course, all controlled just like it is for all the other Azure features that they make sure that doesn't work. But you are still technically running on a set of boxes that are shared, whereas dedicated capacity with Premium, the idea is that you're on your own box. So there are some security concerns in companies. The dedicated capacity may be the way they want to do it anyway, just in case that something might happen. They prefer the security of that. I've seen that as well. The other big thing you get is, I kind of mentioned with the shared capacity, you publish your reports into a workspace. That changes a little bit with Premium. You start getting in, and it happens with Pro as well. You start getting into these app workspaces. So the idea being you create a finance workspace, you create an operations workspace, publish the reports that apply to finance or operations specifically, and then you can actually, from those workspaces, then create what they call a Power BI app that then can be automatically installed within each of those users' Power BI instance. So basically, they log into Power BI, they'll immediately see the finance app. They can click the finance app to get to just their reports, so they can actually get there really quick. They could actually even save that hyperlink if they wanted to make it like their homepage, stuff like that. Makes things a little bit easier to segregate the reporting, so you're not just looking at a big old list of hundreds and hundreds of reports.
How different is it from the content pack that we are already using in product?
Right, he's asking about how different that is from content packs. Well, content packs are gone, deprecated now, so it's actually, I think they're calling them template apps or something like that. But same idea, basically. Yeah, it's a pre-collected piece of reports, dashboards, data sets, all kind of munched together and out there. The difference being that content packs and template apps are something they can put out there on the App Store or App Source and download either for free if the company that made it decides to put it out there for free, or they can charge for it. That's really the only difference. It's a way of externally sharing the same thing that you could build your own self with your data, with an app workspace. Yep. Okay, and then the other things that you get into with Premium is a lot on the storage, as you can imagine. So the default when you're not on Premium is that each user is limited to a data set that you can't publish that's any bigger than 1 gigabyte, which sounds pretty small, but actually with Power BI, what you gotta keep in mind is it does compress stuff. And, typical, people say it's about a 10-to-1 compression ratio. So even though it's that actual data set on disk looks like it's 1 gigabyte, once it gets inflated into RAM, it could be up to 10 gigabytes of actual data, which is actually a pretty good chunk of data if you think about it. So even at the 1 gigabyte, it's still a lot more than it sounds like. But then you can, with Premium, that gets bumped up to 10 gigabytes per user, and that's actually something I'll show in futures is actually changing as well. When you go to the full P1 through P3 SKUs that exist today, that data set limit is actually going to be removed completely to be the capacity of whatever your instance is set up for, your Power BI Premium instance capacity. And then the maximum storage in total changes as well. So this is all of the reports, all the PBIXs that have been deployed to your setup will actually increase. There's a limit when you're not on Premium of 10 gigabytes per user. So, if you do 10 1 gigabyte reports on the non-Premium, you've blown up your space. You'll actually be told you're going to have to remove stuff from your space as a user to make more room for something new. Whereas when you go to Premium, that goes up to 100 terabytes for the entire company, for your entire capacity, with no user limits. So then users can put as much out there as they want, which could be good, could be bad, hard to say. But at least it gives you a lot more room to grow out there, and there's no individual user limits. It also changes how scheduled refreshes work on those data sets. If you're using a data set where you actually have to go back to your on-prem system or something once a day to update them, if you're in that scenario, when you're not on Premium, you're limited to 8 of those refreshes per day. So the idea on each data set, I should say. So the idea being that's one time per hour for a typical work day is kind of the idea. When you go to Premium, that increases to 48 times per day per data set. So gives you the capability to actually do it like every half hour for the 8 hours of a typical work day. But you can spread it out however you want it. You just have to do it on the 15-minute slices, basically, when you're on Premium.
Direct query is not impacted.
Right, yeah, he's asking about direct query in relation to that, and that's not impacted, because direct query and live connection, if you're connecting to a Azure AS model, tabular model, or a multi-dimensional model, those limits don't apply, because it's always going to get the latest when they hit the report, so, yep. Then you do get access to the embedding APIs, of course, when you're in premium. So that's how some of those embedding SKUs work as far as being able for you, if you're an ISV or an independent software vendor like, Redgate or anybody else that's building your own tool, but you don't want to build a reporting piece yourself of your app, you can actually leverage the embedding APIs within Power BI then to actually sell that as part of your product that you're reporting, and on the back end it's using Power BI as actually your reporting engine. So it saves you a little bit of effort there, and that's where all those different embedding SKUs come into play that you would pay for because it's rendering your reports for you. And then you also get a newer feature that they've added within the last, I think, 6 months or so. They added the incremental data set refresh. So if you do have a large data set that's out there and it would take, a long time to refresh, you can actually set up this incremental data set refresh where you can tell it to look at a specific date time column within your data set and say, only give me the stuff that's new since the last time. So then it only refreshes just that new piece within the data set, which is really handy if you do have super large data sets that allows you just to refresh the new stuff. So that's a feature that you can only get with premium right now. And then the biggest one that I've kind of mentioned over and over again is, the sharing with the entire organization. So if you're not on Power BI Premium and you want to share reports, then everybody has to have Power BI Pro basically. So you would, as the developer of the report, you have to have Pro to publish it, and then you share it with someone else. If you're not on premium capacity, they have to have a Pro license to even look at it. Nope, go ahead.
Are there any differences from embedded and premium regarding the data source? Say row-level security and stuff?
Any differences between embedded and, you're talking like the P SKUs, the regular Power BI Premium SKUs?
If you share it with a user which is not in your directory?
Oh, okay. As far as sharing data sets. I don't, they keep changing that. It's hard for me to put my finger on exactly how that works. I think the thing you'll get into though for row-level security is if you're using an Azure Analysis Services tabular model, that only works with actual Windows authentication. So you're going to have those users in your AD for that to work. So I think that kind of goes into that whole B2B, B2C Azure AD setup. But I think as long as you've got that set up, as far as I understand, that should work. It should be able to do that. As far as I know, I haven't heard of anything where you can't, you're restricted to certain data sets or not having security within the embedded SKUs. Mm-hmm. So are you asking about the Power BI, the on-prem Power BI report server? No, so you don't have to have a Power BI Pro license to view when you have the on-prem Power BI report server, just to publish. So the developer that's building the reports needs to have a Pro license to push it up. So there's nothing to stop you from just getting one Power BI Pro license for the whole company and you just all share it, and that's the person who publishes to the server. But then from there, everybody can access the reports, the Power BI reports on that server. Yep. All right, what else do we have? So some of the other features, and this has kind of been a big shift recently if you've been following some of this stuff, is that they are kind of making premium into the area where they're going to put up the newest stuff first for Power BI. So going forward, that's kind of where anything that's new within the Power BI service is going to go to premium first. If it works in premium and people like it and it's a really demanded feature, they'll look at whether they're going to deploy it down to the free tier or the shared capacity. The biggest one I'm talking about in that area is the paginated report capability that you can publish reports to a premium capacity. Chris Finland was actually just talking about that in the last session before this and said that initially when they put it out so that paginated reports were only on the premium capacity, there was a technical limitation that prevented them from putting it on anything but the premium. They've since worked out that technical problem, so he's basically it's in the hands of marketing and the product people within Microsoft to figure out what they're going to do from there. If they're going to have another tier below premium, maybe where people can do paginated reports within the shared capacity even. So keep your eyes open for stuff on that here in the new year. I guess that's something that might come up if you really are interested in that paginated report feature but don't want to pay for a full premium setup. That might be coming to more areas.
I was in the session with Amir Net.
Yeah, this on yesterday.
Yeah, they broke premium into 3 segments. One is 100 gig, another is like 100 terabyte.
Oh yeah, you're talking about, okay, yeah, he's mentioning from Amir's roadmap session. There was yeah, and I'll get into that too in the futures, but yeah, they're going to start making it where you can do even more with the capacities. In fact, from what he said, he mentioned a P5 SKU, which doesn't exist today. So apparently they're already talking about P4 and P5 as new SKUs within the premium capacity that will go up to 400 gigabytes of RAM. And then there's going to be a tier on top of that that they're talking about that I'll get into in futures as well that'll allow you to do up to 10 terabytes of a model. So that's, you know, I just can't even fathom that. But no, so yeah, he's asking if there's any difference between the tiers, and right now, no. If you buy a P1, the only limitation being it's 25 gigabytes of RAM and 8 processors, and then it doubles for each of the ones after that. The nice thing about the bigger SKUs too that you can do is if you buy a P2 and you want to have finance on their own setup, you can actually split a P2 into 2 P1s. You can't split a P1 any smaller than what it is. It stays a P1. But if you buy a P2, you can split it into 2 P1s, put finance on that P1, so they have full reign over the setup on that machine, and then you can have the second P1 for everybody else. So when if you have that monthly period of time where finance says we must have these reports and they must finish in this amount of time, that's a way to segregate some of that traffic off, which is kind of nice. Yeah, you can buy as many of those P3s as you want. If you got the money, you can, and the P3s, you could spin up, 3 P1s or 4 P1s and then, or 2 P1s and 1 P2, et cetera, those kind of combinations. But the lowest breakdown you can do is the P1 tier. So yeah, I mentioned here about the pro licenses are not included and are still required to publish. So you gotta keep that in mind. That's always one that catches people. They do the pricing for premium and then they forget to add in, we have 50 developers. And you're still gonna have to pay $500 a month for the developers then to be able to publish reports to that premium capacity. So keep that in mind. And in the bottom is kind of the mention that I made in response to one of the questions about when you're doing the on-prem Power BI report server, that you're basically going to have to match the licensing within that setup. So that's just something to keep in mind. They're not like, it's not automatically being, there's no, as far as I know, telemetry going back to Microsoft telling people you're using it on twice the machine. It's only when they come in and audit, if they catch you, then they'll know to charge you more or whatever for it if you are using more than what you're currently licensed for. And I'll mention that there's a couple really good links here. So if you are considering Power BI Premium, there's a really good cost calculator that I linked to here. So you can go in there and say, I'm going to have 5 devs and 200 readers of the reports, and it'll actually break it down between staying on just buying pro licenses for everyone and what it looks like if you're going to do it with premium. So that's a really good resource for checking that out if you're interested in seeing the costs. And take it with a grain of salt, because all of those prices are, of course, the retail. So if you negotiate with Microsoft, it may not cost that much. You can also always get good deals if you're a big enough customer and demand enough from them. Let's see where we're at on time. 4 o'clock. Okay, good. All right, so I've got it in here to do a little demo. It's not really much to show. In fact, I've been in premium, you didn't even know. But as far as some of the stuff that will look different, it's going to be that you can have the home page now with the different apps. Oh, and look, they're always prompting me for feedback. Yeah, they really want to know how well they're doing. So yeah, you get all these kind of favorites. I think this is kind of the same even for the free version, but you'll notice it has this My Apps section. With this being just my own Power BI Premium instance, there's not a ton of content on it, so I can't show you a ton of details, but you kind of get the idea with the workspaces. I've got workspaces for each of those three apps where I've presented kind of the same thing at SQL Saturdays and then the past summit, put it all kind of in separate workspaces so then I could publish them as separate apps. If I click the apps, then that's kind of where you get the nice big logos. And then like I said, if it was a finance app, you'd click it and go right into whatever report is set up on that. You do get a little bit of control on the apps when you go to publish them. They've added a lot of capabilities. You can't do it from that one. I got to do it from an actual app workspace. But when you go in to do the update app, you can actually control that navigation. So what do you want to actually show up? I only have the one report with multiple tabs, but if you had multiple reports, you could actually make it where a report is actually hidden so the user can't see that report within that app. You can change the order, move them up and down, and change stuff. And then you can also do some more advanced stuff with setting up what the width of that left nav pane that they've added with the new look, what the actual width of that is between the 320, 240, or 460 pixels. So a little bit of customization you can do. And then, of course, setting up the permissions, who has access, does it install automatically, which is an important one. They have changed the setting that I haven't had the time to ask why, but if you have entire organization selected, you cannot make it install the app automatically. Used to be you could do that, but now you actually have to go and enter in a restricted list of users, and then you can do the install app automatically. So the way we worked around this for our stuff that we want everybody to have access to is we created a all users group, which I think most people typically do in their companies anyway, and then use that as the group and then select the install automatically. So it does install to everybody's app into their app workspace automatically. So just a little thing to watch out for there when it comes to workspaces. The other difference you get with Premium, of course, is going to be mainly within the settings area. You can come into the admin portal, which I'll get into. I guess we'll go ahead and talk about some of it now because it's right here. But you get some basic usage info. This is kind of one of the biggest complaint areas with the Premium right now is that this doesn't provide a lot of useful detail for admins. So people look for other solutions to actually get better metrics. Unfortunately, the challenge is the way they architected Power BI when they built it. All the logging and stuff's actually going into the Office 365 logging areas. So that's kind of a challenge there, that the stuff is not in an area where Power BI can easily get to it. So, but they are working on this. Hopefully it'll become a lot easier for them to show some better usage details there. You have to manage users within the OSI 365 Admin Center, as it says there. Same for what I was mentioning with the audit logs. They're just providing you the links. If you're not an O365 admin, you're not going to be able to get into those. So that's something to keep in mind. It kind of has the separation between what's Power BI and what's actually an Office 365 admin task. And then the big section here is actually the tenant settings. So this is where you can turn all the stuff on or off within your actual organization, within your capacity. So whether they can actually use data sets across workspaces. There's this new capability with information protection that's currently in preview where you can actually tag stuff as highly confidential. That kind of stuff's all controlled within here, and what those labels are, how they're attached to your existing capabilities if you are going to use that within Azure. Exporting is a big section here, so as to whether people are even allowed to export any reports that are published to your capacity, or it's a specific group that you want to have set up for it. So in our company, we've gone through, of course, and enabled these for only specific security groups so that we can control who actually does exports within the company. This is my personal one, so I don't have any restrictions. I'm the only one using it, so don't turn a lot of that stuff on, but there is that capability. Whether you're going to use ArcGIS maps, analyze in Excel, all kinds of, so there's tons of settings. This is a section that changes the most often with Power BI Premium, so any new feature they roll out, that's where they got to add to this section as they're doing that. So that's kind of the settings area. Then you get into the capacity. I'm just going to ignore that. So the capacity settings area now gets you into if you had multiple P1s or you bought P2s and P3s, this is where you could do that splitting. I can't actually show that here because I am not going to buy a P1 or higher because I certainly don't have $5,000. But if you had that, you would just get some options where you could actually see what your capacity is that you have, and then you decide from there when you click on it, are you going to make your P2 into 2 P1s or keep it as one big P2? Those are the kind of things you can configure with that. Same for embedded. So embedded is in its own separate tab there of capacity settings. So you can have both. So you can have the P1 SKUs in that premium area, and then you can have the embedded SKUs over there as well. So you can buy both. Yeah, and you had a question?
Yeah, there's actually a health monitor in that capacity settings.
Right.
Curious if you knew how accurate that was.
So he's asking about the health settings, which I can actually show you right here on my capacity. As far as I know, this is far better than it was, because when Premium first came out, even when we were using it at the beginning 8 months ago, that health didn't even exist. Pretty much the only thing he had was usage metrics. But the health metrics they built in usually do fairly well. You can tell I'm not doing a heck of a lot with mine. But it breaks it down with all the different capabilities, even tells you for paginated reports how much you're using within that and stuff as well. But yeah, I haven't noticed any the problem I have with our company is we do 90+% of our reporting is Live Connect because we have an Azure Analysis Services model that we run. So I barely see the CPU or memory being used because it's all been pushed off to our Azure Analysis Services instance. Power BI really doesn't do a heck of a lot for us, which is one of the nice things I'll get into with futures with the Power BI Premium instance is the ability to actually deploy that model directly into Power BI instead of us having to also pay for an Azure Analysis Services instance. That's something that is coming down the line as well, which will then make it so that this memory and CPU actually do get used within our capacity. So, we're paying for one separately where we're using it, and then we've got this one that we're paying for that we're barely using for that capacity only because we're using a lot of Live Connect. And that was a trade-off we knew when we got into it as well. Yep.
How do you compare the performance for live connect and getting all the data? Because I saw it a little bit sluggish.
Okay, so he's asking about, the performance of Live Connect. I actually haven't, so it was sluggish when we first did it, and that was our own fault because our Office 365 tenant is in West US data center, and when we spun up all of our Azure resources, we were spinning them up in East US. I don't know why, but that was where we were doing it for whatever reason. And so we found that with our Azure Analysis Services instance on East US and our Power BI on West, it was a little slow on the refresh, so we moved that Azure Analysis Services instance over to the West US, and we haven't had any of those complaints anymore because users were saying, it's taken, it wasn't that bad. It was like, the refresh times were like 10, 15 seconds on bringing up a new page in a report, and it went down to 2 to 3 seconds. So, it just depends on how touchy they are about how it refreshes, but with Live Connect, I haven't noticed any. That depends too on how your model is built. There's a lot of dependencies there on how that works as well. So, yeah, it's hard to say if it's the network latency or is it the design of the model itself. Hard to say. Real quick, we'll mention. Let's see. I think didn't do much here. Oh, sorry. Yes. She's asking on-premise, so you're talking about Power BI Report Server. Can you connect to analysis services? Yes. Yes. Oh yeah, you can, when you do the on-prem, so there's no restriction on the data sources that you can use within Power BI. I mean, there used to be a lot of restrictions when Power BI Report Server first came out, but it's gotten a lot less now. There might still be some data sources that don't work as well within the on-prem Power BI Report Server, but definitely analysis services works, multidimensional and tabular. No issues there. Yep. So yeah, you can configure workloads. This is where you actually determine, you know, are you going to allow paginated reports to even run? Are you going to allow data flows on your instance? So it's nice that this is controllable within each capacity. So you could have, as I was talking about, finance versus operations. Maybe finance could care less about having any kind of paginated reports, so you could turn it off for that capacity, stuff like that. So there's all kinds of configurations you can do, and they keep adding new settings in here all the time. They've added all these granular settings for the data sets, which is really cool that they're adding that. There's the new automatic page refresh that's out as well that you could turn on the capacity. That makes it so that every report then automatically refreshes a certain number of seconds. Just watch it, because you can change this to seconds and make it 1 second, and you'll just see your server pegged, because then every single report that every person's accessing is automatically refreshing every second. So keep that in mind. So if you do get premium capacity, watch that setting if you really do need it. In our case, we just update our data once a day, so automatic page refresh doesn't do us any good. He's asking about the maximum, which one? The maximum pipeline offline data sets. So yeah, there's a lot of these settings I actually am not super familiar with. So yeah, you're talking about this one specifically, the offline data set size. I think this setting is coming into play with some of the preview features that they're working on right now, but there is an active preview right now of being able to deploy models that are larger than 10 gig, because 10 gig is the limit right now within premium even, but they are working on it where, you know, in my case, this is an A4, so it has 25 gigs of RAM. I could change that setting to make the maximum allowable be 25 gigabytes if I wanted. So I could deploy a single model that was 25 gigabytes. Now, if somebody else has a different data set in that same instance and it needs to evict, because there's this capability of evicting data sets, so you only have so much RAM, and if you use up all your RAM, it's going to have to push something out. So, you know, that's something to keep in mind, is once you can use up that maximum RAM, you know, you may end up in a situation where nobody's getting reports because it's constantly swapping between data sets in and out of memory. So that's something to watch out for. That's not something they're going to warn you about. It's just going to be something you're going to have to monitor as an admin and make sure that stuff isn't happening. And that's kind of where some of that, I think the data set evictions and stuff will show up in those health settings. So that is a thing you have to watch out for if you're going to get into that in your particular scenario. Thankfully for me, like I said, we're doing mostly live connect, so we don't have any worries about how large our RAM usage is, at least at this point in time, thankfully. And you can do custom branding. I'll bring that up. As you can see, I did it. Added the Pass Summit logo up here at the top. You can change the cover image, which is kind of this section here. It has like a nice welcome message with your name and all that kind of stuff. You can put a picture down there, and then you can change the theme color. So those are all capabilities that are built into Premium. All right, so getting back to where I was, I think that covered most of the admin as well. Just kind of highlighting here is like I said, this is you can allocate the capacities like we were just talking about, and then manage the capacities. And the other thing that it's there too that I couldn't show is that you actually do get, if you do want to do the Power BI report server in a production environment, it will give you, if you have Power BI Premium, you also get the license to install Power BI Report Server on your on-prem servers as well. So there's two routes to Power BI Report Server. You have an existing SQL Server 2016 hire with an enterprise agreement, or you buy a Power BI Premium capacity, you can also then get the license to install Power BI Report Server on your on-prem server as well. So you can kind of do a hybrid thing if you wanted to, where you could do some stuff on-prem and some stuff in the cloud. All right, up to futures. Oh, you have a question?
I mean, hopefully this is the right time, but is there really, if you already have a SQL Server Enterprise license with a software assurance, is there any reason to purchase premium other than?
So he's asking about, yeah, I already have Enterprise. Do I need, if I have Power BI Report Server, do I really need premium? That's going to be a decision you'll have to make as far as those features I outlined that were for Power BI Premium only. Those features will never come to the Power BI Report Server, basically. So that's kind of the big deciding factor as to whether you go one way or the other. If your company is pretty much dead set on, we want to keep it all on-prem, you'll probably never go to Power BI Premium then at that point. But yeah, and I should mention on that licensing thing, because as I mentioned, you could buy premium capacity and then you get the license to do the Power BI Report Server on-prem, or if you already have an existing license for SQL Server 2016 Enterprise with software assurance, you get Power BI Report Server. It doesn't work the other way as well, where you buy the on-prem and you get cloud capacity. It doesn't work that way. They've intentionally not made it go that direction for whatever reason. So some of these features are things that are already out, and I've tried to go through and update stuff as things have changed this week. The data lineage view is just a new option you can get actually in the report. I could demo it, but it doesn't really show you much. But basically, it's an idea that for every report, you see all the data sets for a given report, and then from the data sets, then you can actually see where they point back to as far as a data source. If it goes through a gateway back to your on-prem server, it does not go any deeper than just data set level. So you can't drill into a specific visual and say, okay, where does that field come from? At least not yet. That's the idea they're going to get to, but for right now, it's at a data set, a report to data set type level, so keep that in mind. But they are working towards it. I think they'll get there. I've seen some demos of it. The data protection stuff, I marked it as GA, I guess from what I just saw in the UI, they're still calling it preview. It is out there in public preview, so it's getting close to GA, I guess, or general availability. But this is the capability in Premium to be able to flag a report as highly confidential, and then if you have all the stuff set up in the back end within the Azure information protection setup, it'd actually make it so that you're either prevented completely from exporting that report, or you could export it, but then as soon as you attach that to an email and send it outside your company, it makes the file no longer work. So it's the rights management capabilities that Microsoft's been building into Office will now be honored within Power BI, which is pretty cool, I think, actually, for some of that stuff. My company has brought that up many times, that we've had people sending Excel files out to people outside the company they probably shouldn't send. So this will be a capability where you just tag the report with whatever level, set up those rules within the Azure information protection, and you don't have to worry about it. It's automatically enforced then, which is really cool. And we kind of mentioned this one as well. This, what they're calling the large models capability is now in preview as well as of Monday. It was in private preview before that, but it is removing that 10 gigabyte restriction when you're in premium. So it'll basically make it as big as your capacity is allowed. And I think that's where that setting we were looking at is actually going to control that, because it looks like we'll be able to control from an admin what the individual max size of a data set is. So you may not want to set that to 25 gigabytes if you have a P1. You could set it to 10, or, well, 10 is what it normally is, but you could set it to 15 if you have a bigger model, just so that people don't eat up all the RAM within your capacity. But yeah, the other interesting part of that talk, where that came out this week even, is that, yeah, 400 gigabytes is what they were mentioning of RAM as a maximum data set size. So that's in line with what they were calling a P5 SKU, because right now the P3 SKU maxes out at 100 gigabytes of RAM. So if they add a P4, it's going to be 200 gigabytes, and then a P5 will be 400 gigabytes of RAM. So Don't even ask about the price because a P3 right now is $25,000 a month, so you can just double it from there. They're doubling as they go, so you're talking $100K a month for a P5. So, yeah, if you need that kind of capacity, good on you. I don't want to manage it though. The other thing they are working on is some of those capacity metrics we were looking at. They're going to try to make them better, as I've mentioned. That's been one of the big complaints that we've had as Power BI Premium customers too, is it'd be nice to have some better metrics on how well it's actually doing over time. So they're working on that as well. A lot more home customization coming in, so that home page that I showed you, they're actually going to allow for a lot more customization of how those different things show up within there. Add your own help links, add your own videos, all kinds of capabilities within that home page that are coming as well. I'm not sure if that's going to be premium only. I wouldn't be surprised to see some of that stuff roll down to the shared capacities as well, because they're probably just going to update all of them with the refresh. And then there's something called the XMLA endpoint, which is basically the capability for you to access all of the data sets you've deployed within your Power BI Premium capacity with third-party tools. So if you're used to using SSMS to connect to your Azure analysis services or your existing analysis services on-prem instances, this is the same capability for your Power BI data sets. So this is the read capability is already out. So right now you can actually just go into any Power BI data set. There's a server settings option in the settings, and it has a link that you copy that URL into SSMS, connect to it as an analysis services instance, and you can just look at the data set as if it was, deployed to a regular analysis services server, because that's really all Power BI is doing in the background. Is those data sets are all just tabular model data sets anyway. Yes.
On that note, did you say that premium capacity is a direct replacement of analysis services?
And I knew that question would come up. So yeah, he's asking if the premium capacity is kind of a replacement for Azure Analysis Services, and that is the plan, definitely. That the team that runs analysis services, mainly Christian Wade and the people that work below him at Microsoft, have been actually moved within the Power BI group. So the Power BI group includes the analysis services people, the reporting services people, and the Power BI people now. So it's all one team. So yeah, that's their plan. Their plan is to actually make it so that if you want to deploy a model like we have into your Power BI Premium capacity, you can do that. And that's something we've been bugging them for since we moved to it, because it's perfect for us because we have a fairly small model. It would be nice to have it all living in Power BI, and we can manage it all in Power BI. And that's kind of where they're working on the tooling right now. The right endpoint is basically the last piece of that puzzle, I think, to make that work, along with the bigger model sizes, because they needed to lift that 10 gigabyte restriction to make that work.
Did it use the same gateway as the analysis services?
So you're asking if you use the same gateway. So yeah, it would still have to, if you're still loading your analysis services model from on-prem data sources, then yeah, it would still have to talk through the gateway to get to those. And we're actually using Snowflake as one of our back-end database technologies. So that's an Azure cloud technology that we're using as our database. Unfortunately, even though it's in the cloud, it's not natively supported within analysis services. So we have to use an ODBC driver that's installed on our gateway server. So it's kind of this really weird setup where it starts from the cloud, comes down to our gateway, goes back to the cloud, and does this. We haven't noticed any major latency problems with it, but it is kind of something that's kind of crazy that even though it's something that lives in Azure, we can't do a direct setup unless we were to spin up a separate gateway VM within Azure, which might be the solution for that if it continues that way. But fingers crossed they'll actually make a native Snowflake connector within analysis services here soon. She's asking if it will stay on-prem. As far as I know, on-prem, yes. As far as I know, they're not going to get rid of the on-prem. The same question kind of came up in the last session about SSRS. Is SSRS dead? And it's like they're saying, no, it's still got its use. So analysis services, sure. The thing that you'll notice, though, is that the features of the multidimensional cubes within analysis services are probably at their end as far as being upgraded or getting new capabilities. It's pretty much all just going to be in tabular going forward. They're not going to, they pretty much already have said that multidimensional is kind of it's done, it's feature complete basically at this point. They're not going to spend a lot of time or resources on it anymore. Yep. Okay, so then the other thing that got announced this week is on top of that 400 gig limit is they're talking about the capability of doing what they're calling the extended memory capability that will allow you actually to go up to 4 terabytes of a model size, which not sure on the details on that one. It is still in private preview, so I don't even know how far along that is, but to me it sounded like how they were selling it is that it's a extension of you buy this extra RAM or whatever for your premium capacity. Whether it requires a P5 SKU, because that would be, they were saying, I think the 4 terabytes would be only if you were at a P5 and you bought that new level of service, is kind of where the 4 terabytes would come in. I don't know if that's going to be different, lower amounts. We'll have to wait and see how they're going to sell that going forward. But those are for some really monster size models. And then there's more links as well down here for the stuff that they're releasing is what they call part of their Wave 2 capabilities, which goes through March of next year. And then there's also a YouTube video of what that was. So make sure you check those out. All right, so I actually made it through all of that content. We can do some Q&A real quick here in a minute. There's a little bit of time left. I'll mention the session evaluations. Make sure you get those filled out and sent in. Helps all of us get better. And then there's my contact info. So we can do a few minutes of questions here before I get kicked out. But anybody have any other questions real quick? Oh, sure. How do you change the SKU? So you are, okay, so you want to like move up and possibly move back down. I don't know how you do that. You'd probably have to work with Microsoft to do some of that kind of switching, especially going down. I don't know how that would work, but if you bought a P3 and you initially split it to multiples of the P1s or P2s, you could easily go back in and recombine and remove. As far as going from a bigger one to a smaller one, though, I don't know how exactly that would work. Yeah, well, I think probably what they would have you do is somehow they would probably work with you to spin up the smaller capacity. You would need to transfer your stuff over into it and then delete the bigger capacity is about how I could think of that they would do that. Yes? Monitor what? Metrics by workspace. So there is capability within a workspace to actually go and look. It's, oops, wrong click. If you go into the workspaces, and it has to be an app workspace, I think, if I remember right, and there's where the Lineage view is. If you go to, it's been a while since I've done it, but I know there's metrics in here somewhere. Oh, you want to actually be able to do. Right. I don't know of any way to do that right out of the bat. Maybe you can only do the monitoring on apps, not on workspaces. I'm not seeing the options I'm looking for within here. There's usually a option to look at settings, and I'm not seeing. It's been a while since I had to do it, so I can't remember where it is. Yeah, it's not in view. What's that? Is it on the report? Oh, okay, maybe that's so. Yeah, And that's why. So what we did, and my company is there was, and I don't know if it's still out there, but there was a content pack from Neil. It was more than a content pack. It was a whole Azure setup, solution templates, what they call it. But Neil Analytics had done a solution template where it actually, you had to get your O365 admin to sign in with it when you ran the template, because they had the rights to create, and it created all the hooks into the Office 365 logs and would do like an ETL process out of Office 365, put it into an Azure SQL database, and then they had reports in Power BI built on top of that that you could customize. It was free, assuming you had put Neil Analytics down as something in your Azure portal, you would get it free. We never got asked to provide anything else, and since then I think that has gone away. I don't know, you might search for it to see if that solution template's out there, but it's really nice because it pulls all the data in from those 365 logs, and then you can then from there build your own reporting on top of it, because then all the logs are in an Azure SQL instance at that point. So, but yeah, it's just from Neil Analytics was the name of the company, and it was a Azure solution template, I believe is what it was called. I forget what the full name of it was at the time, but yeah, that's what we use. It's nice because then, yeah, we built reports on top of that were customized, that we could see by workspace, by person, all kinds of stuff like that that you're probably looking for. Yes?
Yeah, I've seen PowerShell solutions that export the log files to
Okay.
blob storage, and you use the blob storage.
Yeah. So yeah, he's talking about, yeah, there's solutions that can export those logs out of O365 into blob storage as well. So yeah, there's lots of capabilities out there, but it is kind of a roll your own, unfortunately, at this point, because they have not exposed that because it's in Office 365, unfortunately. So, yep. What was that? DAX Studio. DAX Studio is completely free. Yeah, that's out at SQLBI.com. Yeah, that's a tool that's out there for anybody in the community to use. Yep. And that's where that XMLA endpoint that I talked about comes into play too, is now those kind of tools can actually work directly with your Power BI data sets without, you having to have a server set up locally to run them. You can actually just connect it right up to Power BI. Yep, it's a good tool. I use DAX Studio all the time. So, and Tabular Editor is another tool. That's if you're doing tabular models within even your on-prem analysis services instance. Tabular Editor is a really good third-party free tool as well. Yep. All right, thank you all.